Flames roared across the ridge like a ravenous beast, devouring dry grass and pine in its path. Thick gray smoke billowed into the sky, turning midday into a choking twilight. And in the midst of that inferno, a Cheyenne warrior guided a trembling young settler wife, both of them clinging to one fragile hope that not all was lost to the fire. The Wyoming sky arched overhead in a vast, crystal blue expanse, as though challenging mortal eyes to take in its endlessness. Rolling hills of tall golden grass and scattered pines spread beneath that grand ceiling. Here, the wind never seemed to rest, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth, pine sap, and distant water. To newcomers the land felt daunting, almost untamed, yet to those who called it home, its every contour was etched with meaning. Along a narrow trail carved by wagon wheels, Martha Wilcox pressed a hand to her brow, shading her pale green eyes from the relentless sun. She was only 19, the sun already deepening the freckles across her cheeks. Her stiff Sunday shoes, now caked with dust, sank into the hard, packed earth with each cautious step. She glanced behind her at the battered wagon that held the last remnants of her new life. Its single horse, an aging bay, snorted at the dryness of the day. They had come so far from the soft farmland of Pennsylvania to this raw frontier, chasing her husband James's dream of building a ranch on cheap government land. Yet the dream had taken an unexpected turn when James disappeared 3 weeks ago, riding off in search of missing horses and never returning. In the lonely days that followed, Martha's mind had spun with questions and dread. She had gone out searching, found only hushed prairies and silent ravines. Her goal now was stark and urgent: find James or find help. Her fear was just as real, fear of being alone, fear of the unknown. Perhaps worst of all, she feared discovering that James was never coming back. The ache in her heart warred with her fierce determination to survive, for she carried more than just her own life in her womb. She was newly pregnant, a secret she had barely begun to understand. She trudged on, exhaustion gnawing at her bones, determined to reach the distant trading post where, rumor had it, a scout might help her. The land shimmered beneath the sun, the horizon rippling like water in a bowl. She felt small, too small in a place so wide. Suddenly her horse jerked its head up, ears flicking forward. Martha tensed, aware that she was not alone. Emerging from a stand of pines was Tihan, a Cheyenne brave in his late 20s. He moved with a quiet grace that belied deep fatigue. His hair, braided and bound with a single eagle feather, hung over his broad shoulders. Leather leggings and a fringed shirt showed signs of travel and careful hand stitching. His face carried the wariness of many days under the sun, and his dark eyes, alert, scanning, seemed to reflect every shift of light across the plains. Tihan was not here by chance. He had been tracking the disappearance of 2 Cheyenne youths, rumored to have been taken by horse thieves. He believed those thieves had sold them or delivered them to unscrupulous men near the new settlements. He had left his family's camp with a heavy burden, to bring the youths home or at least learn their fate. That was his goal, to restore hope to his people, who had already lost too much to broken treaties and relentless westward expansion. Yet fear weighed on him like a grinding stone, the fear that he would fail, that the sacred bond of community was being devoured by the unstoppable tide of white settlement. And there was a deeper fear still, of hatred and bloodshed, a cycle he had seen intensify in recent years. He had lost kin to cavalry raids. To survive these times he had steeled himself with caution and resolve. When he spotted Martha standing in the open, vulnerability etched across her sunburned face, Tihan felt torn. Caution demanded he avoid her, a white settler who might call soldiers upon him. But another instinct pushed him forward, an instinct of compassion taught by his grandfather, that life was precious and no one in the wilderness could survive alone. Martha, for her part, froze, heart thudding against her ribcage. In Pennsylvania, the only stories she had heard of the Cheyenne were told in warning. "They're savage, they'll scalp you." But rumors and reality often diverged. This man's posture was not overtly hostile, and his expression, if guarded, held no immediate menace. A tense silence stretched, Finally, Cheyenne raised his right hand, palm outward, a gesture of no harm. Martha did the same, swallowing. Her instincts wavered between fear and the desperate need for any help. In a halting mix of English and Cheyenne, Cheyenne spoke. "You alone." Martha nodded, fighting tears that threatened to surface. "My husband is missing," she managed. Her voice, cracked with thirst and worry, told as much of a story as her words. "Please, I just want to find him." Cheyenne glanced around as though sensing other presences. Finding none, he inclined his head. "I ride that way." He gestured west toward the sprawl of hills. "I see tracks. Maybe your man's horse. Maybe those who took Cheyenne youth." A spark of hope lit Martha's eyes, tempered by caution. She found herself, in that strange moment, forming an unspoken alliance. They both searched for lost people stolen away by the same cruel hands. If they joined forces, perhaps each might find answers. And so, with the sun blazing overhead, Martha and Cheyenne started walking side by side. The wind carried the whispers of a land that saw everything and judged nothing. Their uncertain partnership had begun. The nights had grown more restless, the days hotter. Cheyenne and Martha traveled with a fragile truce, each uncertain how far they dared trust the other. Their conversations were sparse, hindered by language barriers and mutual wariness. Yet necessity bound them. The search for James and the missing Cheyenne youths led them across rugged terrain. Rock-strewn hills, narrow gullies, and gullies that snaked under the scorching sky. They camped one evening near a shallow creek, grateful for the trickling water that offered a brief respite from thirst. Martha set out a small pot to catch water for boiling, while Cheyenne tended to the horses. The oppressive heat clung to them like a second skin. The smell of dust and sweat filled the air. That's when they heard it, a faint sound carrying through the stillness. A distant gunshot. Martha's heart jumped into her throat. Cheyenne froze, eyes narrowing at the horizon. Another shot rang out, followed by muffled shouting. It came from just beyond the rise of a small hill to their west. Martha exchanged a tense look with Cheyenne. Fear flickered across her face. "Could it be him?" she whispered. She didn't dare say James's name in case it sounded too desperate. Cheyenne merely nodded, slung his rifle across his shoulder, and began to move, signaling for Martha to stay back. She, stubborn and worried, followed closely regardless. Cresting the hill, they crouched behind scrub brush, gazing down at a harrowing scene. Two men in tattered hats stood over a group of Cheyenne youths. 3 boys who couldn't be older than 15. Bound at the wrists, they huddled together in terror near a small campfire. One of the kidnappers was brandishing a revolver, while the other rummaged through the captive's belongings. It appeared to be a small, time operation. Perhaps they meant to ransom the youths or sell them to unscrupulous ranchers. Martha felt her stomach churn at the cruelty on display. She glanced at Cheyenne. His jaw was set tight with anger, chest heaving in restrained fury. When the armed man struck one of the boys with the butt of his pistol, Cheyenne tensed, about to rise. Martha grabbed his arm. She realized that any direct confrontation could lead to bloodshed. She couldn't bear the thought of more violence, but the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. Cheyenne's voice was low, trembling with suppressed rage. "I must free them." Martha nodded, eyes shining with tears. She reached into the pocket of her skirt and drew out her small Derringer pistol, a wedding gift from James meant for self-defense. She barely knew how to use it, but she wasn't about to cower. Cheyenne offered a tight, appreciative nod. Their shared resolve coalesced into a plan. They would attempt a stealth approach. Cheyenne from one side, Martha drawing attention from the other. The night air grew electric with tension as they split up, each creeping around the perimeter of the kidnappers' makeshift camp. The older of the 2 men was cursing under his breath, complaining about how these heathens didn't have enough value. The younger man spat on the ground, muttering something about trading them for horses. Martha felt her hands shaking around the small pistol. Every step crunched in the dirt. She prayed they wouldn't hear her. Her heart thundered so loudly she feared it would betray her presence. Then, with a signal lost to the night, Tihan sprang from the darkness, rifle aimed. Martha jumped out from the opposite side, pistol shaking in her grip. "Leave them alone!" she shouted, voice trembling but urgent. For a moment the two kidnappers stood in stunned confusion. Tisan barked a command for them to drop their weapons. The older man snarled, "Why ain't givin' up nothin' to some redskin?" His sentence ended abruptly as Tisan fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. Martha's heart hammered. She willed her aim to stay steady. She saw the younger man's eyes dart around, calculating if he could draw on them faster. Her finger tightened on the trigger. One misstep could end in blood, but she refused to blink. Finally, with curses and gritted teeth, the two men threw down their guns. They raised their hands in surrender, though the hatred in their eyes burned bright. Tihan motioned them away from the bound captives. He quickly bent down to cut the ropes around the three Cheyenne youths, who clung to him with tears of relief. Martha let out a shaking breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In that instant, the older kidnapper lunged for his discarded pistol. A shot rang out. Martha squeezed the Derringer's trigger without conscious thought. A flash, a recoil that jarred her arm. The man stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt. He howled in pain, shock etched across his features. Tihan's eyes snapped to Martha. She stood there, Derringer smoking, tears brimming in her eyes, horror dawning on her face. The younger outlaw went rigid, staring in disbelief. Then, with a snarl, he grabbed his partner and scrambled away, disappearing into the darkness. Martha and Tihan allowed them to flee. The immediate goal was saving the captives. Breathing ragged, Martha collapsed to her knees, adrenaline surging through her in a dizzying wave. She had never shot a man before. The weight of that act pressed down on her like a yoke. Yet she also understood that she might have saved them all. Tihan knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. He murmured something gentle in Cheyenne. Though she could not understand his words, she felt the warmth of gratitude. Then, quietly, he touched his forehead to hers, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. Lives had been spared barely. They helped the three Cheyenne youths bury the kidnappers' campsite. Among the gear, Martha's eyes caught a glimpse of a torn jacket sleeve. Familiar fabric. Her stomach twisted. It belonged to James, or so she believed. The color and pattern matched the jacket James always wore. Fear renewed its grip on her heart. What had these men done to her husband? She asked the boys if they had seen a white man with that jacket, but they shook their heads, confused. The older boy said he thought the kidnappers had stolen clothes from travelers along the trails. Dawn broke over them like a bruised sky, its pink and orange hues casting the land in surreal light. They had saved 3 young lives, yet the trail of James and the lost Cheyenne youths, besides these 3, remained half hidden in the dust. A new question gnawed at Martha's mind. Was James in the hands of more outlaws, or had he met a worse fate? In the hush of morning, Tihan escorted the rescued youths toward a safe path back to a Cheyenne camp, while Martha gathered her battered courage and prepared to keep searching. The fire of uncertainty burned in her chest. She had drawn blood likely saved lives. The moral lines of the frontier blurred further. The wind hissed across the tall grass, carrying the faint tang of approaching storms. Gray clouds began to cluster on the horizon, threatening heavy rain or worse, a lightning storm that could spark wildfires across the dry hills. Martha and Tihan had parted ways briefly with the Cheyenne boys. They had left them safely in the care of a small settlement known for peaceful dealings with the tribe. Now the warrior and the wife pressed on alone, a tension forming between them after the violence. For all their cautious bonding, distrust still simmered in the background. Martha worried if Tisan had truly forgiven her people for the cavalry raids, while Tihan questioned whether Martha would still see him as a savage if it came to choosing sides. Each carried secret burdens. They were following rumors of an outlaw hideout near a place called Burnt Timber Ridge, a rocky outcrop that overlooked the wide valley. Locals whispered that stolen goods and stolen people were occasionally kept there before being moved on. Martha's hope was that James might be among those forcibly detained, though it tore at her heart to imagine him suffering. At midday, they arrived at the edge of the ridge, where twisted pines and charred stumps bore the scars of a past fire. The wind whipped about them, carrying darkening storm clouds. They searched for signs of a trail, a trampled patch of grass, fresh footprints. Then they noticed a small cluster of tents hidden behind an outcropping of rock. Smoke curled from a makeshift campfire. Creeping closer, they spotted 5 hardened men inside that camp, rifles within easy reach. A battered horse corral stood nearby, with half a dozen animals inside. Heart pounding, Martha scanned for James, but saw only scrawny figures, a woman with 2 children huddled to one side, possibly captives. Toussaint recognized them as Arapaho from their clothing patterns. Anger flickered in his eyes. It was too dangerous to confront 5 armed men head-on. Martha and Cheyenne debated a plan. They agreed to attempt a rescue under cover of darkness. Until then, they concealed themselves carefully in a nearby ravine, taking turns on watch while the clouds drifted overhead. Night fell with an eerie calm, lightning flickering in the distance. The men at the camp drank whiskey and laughed raucously, paying little attention to their captives. Eventually, 4 of them stumbled into their tents. One remained by the fire, rifle leaning against his log seat. Martha's pulse thundered as she and Cheyenne crawled on their bellies through the tall grass, inching nearer. Sparks rose from the dying fire, illuminating the guards' drunken nodding. Cheyenne clutched his bow. He carried one in addition to the rifle, and Martha again held her derringer, though she hated the thought of pulling the trigger. They reached the corral first, where the Arapaho woman cowered at the sight of Cheyenne and Martha, uncertain if they were more tormentors. Cheyenne pressed a finger to his lips, whispering reassurance in Cheyenne, hoping the woman might understand a few words. Martha carefully unlatched the corral gate. The guard by the fire stood suddenly, perhaps sensing movement. Cheyenne rose in one fluid motion, drew the arrow back and loosed it. The arrow thudded into the ground near the guard's feet, startling him. He cursed, fumbling for his rifle. A second arrow pinned his hat to the tree behind him. Whether from fear or confusion, the man froze. "Let them go," Cheyenne growled in halting English. The guard, wide-eyed, dropped his weapon. Martha helped the woman and her 2 children slip free. One of the children whimpered softly, tears streaking dust across small cheeks. But at that moment, the 4 other men lurched out of their tents, guns in hand. Thunder rumbled across the sky. A shot rang out, grazing Cheyenne's forearm. He staggered, suppressed a cry. Martha's entire body went cold with fear. Her free hand clutched the Arapaho child, pulling them away. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark relief. The outlaws advanced, determined not to lose their captives without a fight. Cheyenne dove behind an overturned wagon, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. Martha's heart hammered as she shielded the woman and children behind her. She raised her derringer, but it only held 2 shots at best, and her trembling nearly rendered it useless. Then came the rain. Fat droplets slapped the dust, turning the ground slick. Smoke hissed from the dying campfire. In the confusion, Cheyenne fired a shot that clipped one outlaw's leg, sending him sprawling. Another bullet whistled by Martha's ear, the shriek echoing in her mind. Suddenly, a bright flash overhead. Lightning struck a nearby pine, igniting its branches. Flames raced across the pitch-laden needles, showering sparks onto the dry grass. A flicker of red began to dance across the hillside. The wind whipped up, feeding the newborn blaze, fire. In mere moments, it could sweep across the ridge unstoppable. The outlaws fell back, alarmed by the sudden blaze. Cheyenne seized the moment to yell at Martha, "Go!" "Take them?" She nodded, eyes desperate. She motioned the Arapaho woman and children along, sprinting toward safer ground. Shots popped behind her, but the swirl of smoke and rain soon obscured everything. She could hear Cheyenne's voice, sometimes shouting in Cheyenne, sometimes in ragged English. She prayed he would find a way out. Reaching a safer hollow in the land, Martha crouched with the terrified woman and children. panting for breath. She realized with sick dread that James was nowhere to be found. This entire rescue had revealed no sign of him. Minutes later, Cheyenne emerged from the smoke, coughing violently. He had a bloodstain on his sleeve, eyes watering. Behind him, the ridge glowed with ominous orange light. The outlaws had scattered, but the wildfire was no less dangerous. They had saved these new captives, but their own predicament worsened. In the flicker of flames and the driving rain, the Arapaho woman clutched Cheyenne's arm, uttering words of thanks. She pointed into the night, indicating a path leading away from the ridge. Yet the wind shifted, fanning the flames toward the corridor they'd planned to use for escape. Martha glanced back at the scorching hillside. Her breath caught. "What do we do? We can't outrun it on foot," she said, voice cracking. Cheyenne's gaze narrowed. He was torn. His people's teachings guided him to help those in need, but the sense of his own quest gnawed at him. Would this rescue cost him the chance to find the missing Cheyenne youths or discover what had happened to James Wilcox? Finally, he steadied himself. We find safe ground or we go around. The moral lines had tangled further. Compassion had a price, but neither Martha nor Cheyenne could turn away from those now depending on them. The storm and the outlaws had placed them all at the mercy of a growing wildfire. The group had retreated to a shallow ravine that offered temporary shelter. Flickers of fire still silhouetted the horizon, painting the morning sky with streaks of dirty orange. Martha coughed, her lungs irritated by the drifting smoke. The two Arapaho children, a boy and a girl, clung to their mother's side, eyes wide with fear. Cheyenne paced, ignoring the dull ache in his wounded arm, scanning the terrain for a path around the flames. They needed to move. The wind could shift at any moment, driving the fire toward them. The land was parched from weeks of dryness, and the scant rain hadn't been enough to quench the newly sparked blaze. Time was running out. That was when they heard a rider approaching. Cheyenne instantly snatched his rifle, prepared for another ambush. But as the rider drew near, Martha gasped. It was James. He emerged from the swirling smoke on a skittish horse, face smeared with soot and exhaustion. Relief flooded Martha, tears washing the grime on her cheeks. She rushed forward, ignoring all caution, and threw her arms around him. James slid off the horse, nearly collapsing into her embrace. "Martha," he choked out. "God in heaven, you're alive." She sobbed into his chest. "I thought you were dead. Where have you been?" James's explanation spilled out in fits and starts. He had tracked their stolen horses, gotten caught in an ambush by the same outlaws Martha and Cheyenne had just faced. He escaped, but not before the scoundrels robbed him of supplies and left him in a gulch miles away. For days he wandered, half-starved, trying to make his way back. The wildfire had forced him toward higher ground, where he spotted Martha's wagon tracks and followed them. He coughed, expression anguished. "I was so afraid for you." Martha pulled him close, a swirl of relief and heartbreak tangling in her chest. Cheyenne watched, posture guarded, as though unsure whether James would greet him as friend or foe. The Arapaho family stood aside, uncertain how to respond to this tearful reunion. When James's gaze finally landed on Cheyenne, he tensed. A flicker of distrust crossed his face, the deeply ingrained suspicion many settlers held for the Cheyenne. Who's he?" James asked, keeping his voice low. Martha didn't hesitate. "He saved my life, and I helped him save these people." She gestured to the Arapaho woman and children, who stood quietly in the half-light of dawn. James exhaled, eyes darting from the thickening smoke to Cheyenne's wounded arm. Then, surprising Martha, he offered his hand to Cheyenne. The Cheyenne man regarded it for a moment before clasping it briefly. An uneasy acceptance passed between them. The wildfire's roar on the wind reminded them there was little time for prejudice here if they all wanted to live. "We gotta get out of this ravine," James said, pointing to the north. "I saw a trail leading up a hill. Might lead to rock outcroppings. Fire can't burn stone." He glanced at Cheyenne. "Help me get them there." Cheyenne nodded. "We must go." Martha, supporting James, who still trembled from dehydration, led the ragtag group forward. The Arapaho woman carried her daughter, while her son trudged beside Cheyenne. Each step through the smoky gloom felt like crossing a nightmare. Falling embers drifted in the wind, and ash coated their clothes and hair. Ahead, the silhouette of a high ridge beckoned. If they could scale it, maybe they could outflank the fire. But as they reached the foothill, a wave of flame surged across the grassland from the west, blocking their path. The heat pressed against them like a giant's breath, and the smoke thickened, stinging their eyes, searing their throats. James cursed, nearly stumbling. The horses screamed in terror. The children began to cry. They were pinned between the ridges and the encroaching fire. A choice loomed: risk running through the smoke or remain to be consumed by the flames. And so it was that they found themselves staring at the burning hill, a massive slope of scorched grass, dotted with burning brush, with columns of choking smoke swirling around. On the far side, rocky ground promised safety, but to cross meant braving the inferno. Fear shimmered in everyone's eyes. Cheyenne tested the shifting wind. The path directly through the flames was near impossible, but there was a narrow gully that cut halfway up the burning slope. Less flaming brush there, though smoke poured out in thick columns. If they could hurry along that seam, they might avoid the worst of the flames and reach the rocks. Martha clenched James's hand. She felt her unborn child stir faintly, a reminder of precious life within her. The Arapaho woman gripped her children, whispering soft reassurances. Everyone looked to Tizan for guidance. His eyes, reddened by the smoke, flickered with determination. He had led war parties and hunting groups across perilous terrain, but never had he faced a test quite like this. He turned to Martha, then James. "We move fast. Heads low, wet cloths over face, if we can." He ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt, handed it to the Arapaho woman. Martha followed his example, quickly dampening rags from a small canteen. The water was precious, but so were their lungs. A gust of wind parted the smoke for a moment, revealing a corridor of smoldering ground. Embers glowed orange, steam hissing wherever rain had touched. Cheyenne stepped forward without hesitation. If they waited, the wind might shift again and fully engulf the hill. One by one, they followed him. The heat was monstrous, pressing in on them from both sides. Sparks danced in the air, threatening to catch their clothing. The horses whinnied, eyes rolling in terror as James tugged their reins. Ash coated their skin, and the rancid scent of burning brush stung their noses. Halfway up, the gully narrowed. A fallen tree, ablaze at one end, blocked the path. Cheyenne gritted his teeth. He and James tried to haul it aside, the flames licking at their arms. The Arapaho woman covered her children with her own body, tears streaking her suit-covered face. Martha coughed, fighting dizziness. A final push, and the men rolled the burning trunk aside enough to squeeze through. Smoke swirled thicker now, a suffocating blanket. They stumbled forward, eyes streaming. Cheyenne led them with raw determination, pressing deeper into the choking gloom. Then it happened. The boy tripped, a burning branch catching his leg. He screamed in pain. The mother wailed, trying to pull him free. James, hacking smoke, rushed to help, only to collapse to his knees. Martha darted forward, fear blazing in her chest. Cheyenne grabbed the child, beating out the flames on his clothing. The boy whimpered, singed but alive, yet the moment lost was enough for the wind to shift again. A wave of thicker smoke billowed over them, blotting out all vision. The horses jerked, terrified, dragging the lines from James's grasp. The swirling mass of darkness smothered them. They could barely see one another. Their throats rasped with each breath. Cheyenne's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold on to my hand!" He groped in the darkness, found Martha's arm. She, in turn, seized James's shirt. The Arapaho mother clung to Martha's skirt. They formed a chain of desperate humanity, stumbling forward inch by inch. Guided only by Cheyenne's sense of direction and the faint glow of fire near the edges of the gully, it felt like an eternity. Each second weighed by the possibility that they might all collapse, suffocate, or be consumed by the flames. Finally, the slope leveled off beneath their feet, rocks, solid ground. Emerging from the black smoke, they reeled onto a stony plateau. The contrast felt surreal, cleaner air, the swirl of wind that was not yet full of ash. The children coughed, eyes streaming with tears. James sagged to his knees, retching from the thick smoke in his lungs. Martha gasped, drawing in great gulps of relief even as she rubbed her burning eyes. They had crossed the burning hill. Below them, the fire raged on, devouring the dry brush and surging along the hillside. The wind roared like a predator, pushing the blaze onward. But here, among the rocks, they found a measure of safety. In the distance, the first hints of sunrise pierced the smoky haze, a pale gold light promising a new day. Cheyenne stood with trembling legs, chest heaving. He gazed over the scorched land with a complicated mix of triumph and sorrow. Martha raised her tear-streaked face to him. "Thank you," she managed, voice raw. "You saved us." He said nothing at first, only nodded. Then his voice, hoarse from smoke, emerged. "Why saved each other?" He extended a hand to the Arapaho boy, who managed a shaky smile. James, still gasping, rose unsteadily to his feet. He clutched Martha's hand, and in his eyes there was a glimmer of humble gratitude for the Cheyenne brave who had risked everything. They all turned to look down at the raging fire with solemn reverence. The land was ancient, powerful, and uncaring about their small, fragile lives. But for this moment they had survived it together. The hours that followed passed in a daze of exhaustion and relief. They rested among the rocks, waiting for the wildfire to move on. The storm's diminishing rain helped slow the flames, and by midday, the worst of it had burned itself out on the far side of the hill. Thick smoke still hung in the air, but with more visibility, the group descended carefully, searching for water. Eventually, they found a charred creek bed where the water still trickled black with ash. Not exactly clean, but enough to slake thirst. The group drank, coughing and grimacing at the taste. No one complained. Survival made them grateful for small mercies. They parted ways with the Arapaho family soon after. Cheyenne told them of a route leading to a larger Arapaho village, offering to guide them until they found a known trail. The mother thanked them all with quiet dignity, hugging Martha and clasping Cheyenne's forearm. The children, shy and exhausted, offered timid smiles. As the family trudged toward safety, Cheyenne and the Wilcoxes faced their own uncertain future. Martha wanted to return to the wagon, if it still stood, if it hadn't been torched by the wildfire. James, though still weak from his ordeal, insisted on seeing her safe, guilt-ridden for leaving in the first place. Cheyenne looked out over the blackened fields, a haunted expression on his face. He still hadn't found the other missing Cheyenne youth rumored to be in the outlaws' clutches. James approached him quietly. I know we owe you a debt," he said, the words stumbling out. "You saved my wife, saved us both. If there's anything I can do." Cheyenne regarded him for a long moment. Then his gaze fell to the horizon. "I must keep searching. There are more missing." But he hesitated, perhaps uncertain how to express what he wanted to say. Finally, he looked at Martha, who wore a gentle expression, encouraging him to speak. "I ask that you do not turn away from my people." Cheyenne's voice was calm but firm. "Many Cheyenne suffer. When your neighbors speak of war, remember I helped you. Do not join the voices that say we must all be killed or driven away." The request hung in the air. James lowered his eyes. Martha stepped forward, placing a hand on James's arm. In that moment, the atrocities committed against native tribes flickered through her mind, stories she had heard but never truly understood. Now, having traversed the inferno with Cheyenne, she glimpsed the truth of a shared humanity. "You have our word," she said, voice trembling with conviction. "We won't forget. We'll speak for peace when we can." Cheyenne inclined his head, unsmiling but seemingly satisfied. He pressed a small carved figure of a hawk, perhaps a good luck totem, into Martha's hand. She felt tears sting her eyes again. Then, with a final nod to them both, Cheyenne turned and walked away, disappearing among the blackened pines, continuing his quest for the missing and for the dignity of his people. Martha and James stood there, hands entwined, watching him until his figure merged with the smoky distance. James exhaled shakily, pulling Martha close. "Come on," he said softly. Let's go find our wagon. We'll start fresh." They limped toward the remains of their trail, the smell of scorched grass thick in the wind. The horizon stretched out, half burned, half radiant under the afternoon sun. It was a land both cruel and forgiving, where new shoots might someday spring from ash. As they walked, Martha thought of the baby within her, a new life forming in a place so wild. She prayed it would one day know a frontier without such fires of hatred. In the weeks to come, they would rebuild their homestead, forging alliances with friendly Cheyenne neighbors. Their hearts remained touched by the man who had guided them through the flames. And though they never saw Cheyenne again, they carried his spirit with them, a reminder that bridging cultures, even for a moment, could mean the difference between destruction and hope. Out on the frontier, where fire and fear make harsh demands, there can be no survival without compassion. In the face of the flames, it matters less who wears which hat or speaks which tongue, and more that we share the same fragile breath. In the ashes left behind, new life can find root if nurtured by mutual respect and the will to hope. Because sometimes, mercy is the only bridge that keeps the blaze from consuming us all. Thank you for listening to this story of courage and sacrifice on the wild frontier. If you found meaning in Cheyenne's rescue and Martha's unwavering hope, please like, subscribe, and comment to share your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think about trust, empathy, and the fragile bonds that form in desperate times out on the burning hill.